Hundreds of students are on strike today to pressure universities into ending their ties with weapons companies and Israeli universities, partnerships which they describe as complicity in the war in Gaza. And what would be your message to the public?
My message to the public is that the fight isn't over, the genocide is ongoing, we can't stand idly by.
Our government, our university administrations, they are responsible for the fear, for the panic, for the despair and the sadness that the people, the children, the families, everyone in Gaza have felt in the last 9 months. Shame! Our nation!
Blood on your hands!
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 We need to empathize with the people of Gaza. It shows our hearts as human. It shows Australian values and morals. We should care. Accept our families' visas in Gaza. Let them be given the right to live that we strip them of, that we are a part of why they can't live right now. They need to be here.
University students have set up pro-Palestine encampments and held protests like this since April to show support for Palestinians in the Israel-Hamas war. As a university student myself, I wanted to understand what this movement was all about. The movement has appeared on campuses across the country with students and staff pushing universities to reconsider who they partner with. Negotiations between protesters and university management has been slow and varies between institutions. And some encampments, like the one at my university, have been met with heavy-handed responses.
So we're just here at the University of Newcastle, where protesters have been asked to pack up their encampment and leave. And rather than comply with this, the students are hosting a defence rally. So we're going to go talk to some of the students now.
Staff, students and community members showed up to defend the encampment from being taken down by security. It has been up for over 2 months and is just one of many student-organised camps that have appeared on Aussie university campuses following the same student activism at Columbia University in New York.
Support your neighbour, take care of one another, and when 5 o'clock hits, take care of yourself first.
So our first demand was disclosure. We believe that as a public university where as students we all invest our money in, disclosure should be something that is already publicly available.
The University Vice-Chancellor, Professor Alex Zelensky, has never even visited the camp, but protesters have met with other management staff to discuss negotiations. The university said in the eviction letter that the encampment was an unacceptable risk and had to be packed up. They stressed they weren't trying to limit free speech. But the protesters feel that the university is doing exactly that.
As educators, we have a responsibility to stand proud and firmly with our students.
Security watched on from outside the encampment, and nothing happened when the pack-up deadline came and passed. It looked like a win for the protesters.
So we're back at the University of Newcastle because I got a text this morning from the protesters saying that security had come in and started packing down tents before it was even light out. Some tents had students in them, some didn't, so we're just going now to check out the scene.
Only a couple of tents remained. Worried security would take everything, some students chained themselves down.
And so when did you do this?
So I was chained up all night, sleeping on the couch.
Yeah.
And then as they came at 6 a.m, we started figuring out how to do it better. So at this last stand, we moved the couch over here so we could attach it to the tree. Nothing would be of a surprise of what they would do.
They haven't said that they're going to call the police, and they said that they care for the students' well-being, but they have also taken blankets, taken food, taken pretty much all necessary items for life away from the students while saying they also care for the students' well-being. So there's quite a lot of contradictions in how they've been communicating with us.
The future of the encampment doesn't look good. They will continue to meet with university management with the hopes of keeping their encampment and to discuss their demands. But what exactly are those demands, and why are some students and staff getting behind this? We were meeting with Jean-Louise, a PhD student and tutor at the university who has been helping the encampment.
Could you maybe speak to how universities are involved with these defence companies?
Yes. So I think that the University of Newcastle is particularly awful in this sense. So they'll do like internships, they'll have these industry events and things to really network. So that's getting UON graduates directly. It's like this sort of supply chain into the defence industry workforce.
Like they'll train up students to get them into jobs, into defence companies?
Yes. I think that students here have a particular responsibility to say that we don't consent or we don't agree to that militarisation of universities.
What is the exchange there then? What is the university getting from these companies?
The university does get scholarship funding from these weapons manufacturers, and that's obviously complex because we want students to have scholarships, but there is a huge range of alternative places we could get scholarship funding.
One of the demands of the pro-Palestine student movement is that universities boycott Israeli universities. How would that impact the conflict in Gaza?
Yeah, so that a lot of our demands come directly from Palestinian people, and Palestinian civil society has called for an academic boycott of Israeli academic institutions. In a similar way to cutting ties with weapons manufacturers, it's sort of, bringing that occupation to its knees a bit.
The university declined our interview request. In a statement, they said these partnerships help ensure academic programs remain relevant and align with evolving industry needs. Many Australian universities are connected to the defence industry in different ways. The University of Newcastle hosts the Science and Engineering Challenge, a STEM engagement program for primary and high school students sponsored by Lockheed Martin and Boeing, two of the biggest defence companies. And protesters point out that the now defunct Altitude Accord partnership allowed Lockheed Martin to influence course curriculums. As far as weapon making goes, Lockheed Martin builds parts for the F-35 fighter jet, an aircraft used by the Israeli military fleet who have carried out airstrikes in the region. An investigation discovered the remote guidance systems attached to bombs found in the rubble of destroyed homes in Gaza were made by Boeing. But it's hard to find more details about partnerships, and sometimes this information isn't public.
So here we have the investment report from the Australian National University. And this was obtained by staff and students through a Freedom of Information request. And so this report shows all of their market shares with weapons manufacturers. And it shows that the university has over $1 million of investments with these weapons companies. So we have Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Thales, Bay Systems. And a lot of this information at other universities is really hard to get. So who knows what the investments look like at other universities until, someone submits an FOI or the universities disclose their investment portfolio. So right now I'm about to speak to Dr. Sian Troth, who researches international relations at the Australian National University in Canberra. And specifically, she focuses on militarisation, and she can help explain the relationship between universities and the defence industry.
The military-industrial academic complex describes the relationships between military industry and academia, the way in which they fuel each other, the connections between them, the relationships.
We've looked at the Freedom of Information request done by students and staff at ANU that revealed the university had investments with defence companies. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I suspect it's probably the tip of the iceberg, really, compared to the partnerships.
What sort of impact does this have on education?
A pretty significant impact in a number of ways. What research gets done in universities is directed by what funding is available to do it. So it sort of limits the questions that you can ask or the way that you can approach questions. I think it filters down to have an impact on students as well.
Is there a militarisation of universities?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the clearest things I found was that there was a an increasing closeness you can track.
Even people in the highest positions at universities move to and from the government defence industry. The University of Newcastle's Vice-Chancellor, Alex Zelensky, used to work as the Chief Defence Scientist for the Department of Defence. When he left the defence industry, Tanya Munro took his place, leaving her role as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of South Australia. And some higher-ups are even connected directly to defence companies, like the last Chancellor at the University of Sydney, Belinda Hutchinson, who was on the board for Thales, a French-owned defence company that has links to the Israel Defence Force. Universities even attract funding from the United States Defence Department, which has committed more and more funding to Australian universities over the years. It's safe to say connections between the defence industry and universities run far and wide.
So it's just sort of a perfect storm, really, of the interests of key individuals.
So we're on our way to meet Rand. She's a Palestinian student activist at the University of Sydney, and she's going to tell us a bit more about the pro-Palestine movement there and some of the restrictions that have been placed on their protest.
Hey Rand, I'm Blair.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. How you going?
Yeah, good. We're just down here.
Rand was only 5 when her parents emigrated from Nazareth. She used to travel back to her hometown every couple of years, but since the war started, it's been too dangerous to go back.
Been impacted by things?
Grandma, no, like she tells the soldiers to fuck off.
Really?
And like, yeah, like she's staunch. Like she's just like,
pretty hard.
She has no respect for them. And like, she just also like has no filter, period.
She actually tells them to fuck off.
Yeah. They're like, why are you here purchasing like, these vegetables? Like you've got vegetables in Nazareth. She's like, fuck off, like they're fresher. Like, like literally that's what she does. It's what's called the real map of Jerusalem, and highlights kind of like the oppression that they face.
What about friends? Have they been impacted? Have you heard stories?
Yeah, one of my friends, he's actually, this is Abu Dis, which is where he works, and he lives kind of like here. So he has to cross the wall through this checkpoint every day, or this one. And he was there just like walking around as he always does, forgot his like identity card and passport that day, and they didn't believe him and they just beat him up.
Really?
Yeah, like they were, and it wasn't even like, because if they were genuinely worried, they would have like detained him and questioned him, or like taken him back to his house under supervision and like got the passport and the identity card. But instead, they just beat him up and then left him.
Sorry, what was he doing when he got?
Just walking down the street.
Following months of activism at the University of Sydney, management brought out the campus access policy that banned encampments and placed a bunch of rules on protest. Since encampments have been banned on campus, Rand has turned to other methods of activism.
So what exactly is this?
So this is our fortnightly, what we call FALL, which is the Feminist Anti-Racist Liberation Library. So, we've done film screenings, we've done reading groups, and next week we're going to be doing a writing workshop. And yeah, we're just really trying to do what we can to understand the fundamental theory behind everything that we want to advocate and take action on.
You do another one as well, is that right? An embroidery workshop as well?
Yeah, we have, we call it Cheese and Tatriz. Tatriz is like Palestinian embroidery. So yeah, some motifs are like very personal to me. So the pigeon, we used to have pigeons actually in my home when I was younger, and we used to eat pigeon quite often. And
it tastes like just like chicken.
Yeah, it tastes like chicken. And like olive branch would be one as well that is quite personal due to my family being olive farmers.
And what is, I suppose, the goal of having this workshop?
It's as much about the theory as it is about the community. People quite often get quite disheartened, especially in times like this, where there's a genocide going on and people feel really hopeless. And so it is really just about coming together and kind of being able to grieve.
And as a Palestinian who, has those connections to the Middle East and where this conflict is happening, what sort of message is being conveyed when the university has a policy like this that does restrict those demonstrations and encampments and protests?
It's totally repressive, and it's like, it reminds me of like the Assad regime in Syria. Like, this is how it started. It started on campuses. It's quite scary and it's very real. It doesn't just affect us as Palestinians or pro-Palestinian activists, like it affects all of us.
Why is it important that Australian students who are so removed from this war able to protest that?
Because there's no universities left in Gaza.
Shortly after the campus policy was announced, a group of legal experts at the university put together an open letter voicing concerns about the policy and how it impacts the freedoms of students and staff. So far, over 750 people, including students, academics, politicians, lawyers and journalists, have signed the letter. It was started by Emeritus Professor of Law, Simon Rice.
So do you think that this policy is an overstep for university management and security?
Yes, it's an overstep, one, in light of the history, which is a history of protest without needing this campus access policy, and two, just on its face, it goes way beyond anything that's necessary.
And talk to me about how it constrains students and staff.
So it's quite remarkable in the discretion that it gives security.
The policy rules that protesters need approval 3 days in advance to use megaphones, set up stalls or attach banners on buildings. They must also notify management of any demonstrations in advance.
The university would say that they save it by making you ask for permission. So they say, if you ask, then we'll think about it and approve it with conditions. A little like the police do when you apply for a protest in the city. But again, there are no guidelines. We don't know what their criteria are for approving that. So it's pretty hard to plan something. You certainly can't do anything spontaneous.
It kind of seems like it goes against the whole idea of protest if you've got to ask for permission.
The whole idea of being on a university campus, which is where we're here to explore ideas and express opinions and challenge orthodoxy.
Yeah. Do you think that this campus access policy might become a trend and picked up by other universities?
It's quite possible. As it happens in tertiary education generally, Sydney University is a litmus test for things. It's a big, powerful, long-standing university, and if Sydney University can do something, then others will feel better following. So yes, it's a real risk that if this works for the university, it will be picked up by others.
The university declined our interview request and in a statement said they brought out the campus access policy to ensure they are striking the appropriate balance between protecting freedom of speech while making sure campuses are safe and welcoming. The policy shows how much power universities have to stifle protest. They claim it's for safety, and this is a valid reason as people from the Jewish community are reporting feeling targeted since the movement has grown. But it's unclear if stomping out protest is the solution. I sat down with Mia Klein, a Jewish student at the Australian National University.
No, she's on household.
She moved from Melbourne to make a fresh start in Canberra. But as a Jewish student, she tells me the political tensions on campus has made life very difficult for her.
After October 7, I think Jewish students really became, like in the eyes of the pro-Palestinian movement, spokespeople for the Israeli government and army, when we're not. We're not war strategists, we're not policymakers. We're Jewish students who have, real strong ties to Israel because it's like inextricably linked to our Judaism, but we don't represent the government of the day.
Do you think some of the pro-Palestinian rhetoric goes too far?
I'm wary to answer that question because I don't want to be seen as infringing upon anyone's freedom of speech. But I would say yes, I think it does go too far. Not believing the existence of a Jewish state in, the Jewish people's ancestral homeland, I just don't think that's peaceful discussion. And no one wants to see war and bloodshed and the death of, tens of thousands of people. But when it goes into the territory of anti-Semitism, then it's taken way too far, yeah.
Back in May, Mia was living in a share house with some friends from university. But their friendship came to an end when one day they sat her down.
And I go into the living room at like 9 p.m. and they're both already sitting down on the couch with notebooks in front of them. And I'm like, okay, cool, a little bit of an ambush, but I don't know what to expect yet. And they start by saying, We know that the past couple months have been really difficult for you and that you feel like you have to hide a part of yourself on campus because it's not necessarily a safe space for you. But we feel like we've been walking on eggshells in our house, and we feel like we're fundamentally opposed because of this conflict, and we can't reconcile your views with our values, so we can't live under one roof. I was crying when they were telling me all of this because I knew that it meant it's the end of this share house, which was this lovely, warm environment. Like it's, you know, it's a girls' share house. It's like, you know, it's the best.
What sort of things were you feeling at the time? It would have been very emotional.
So emotional, like I'm like emotional talking about it now. They ruined a chapter of my life in Canberra.
Mia has been trying to avoid getting questions about her heritage. She's even been taking measures to hide the fact that she's Jewish.
A script necklace that I got when I was born, and that says Mia in Hebrew writing. And I used to wear that, but I don't wear that anymore. And then I also have these two that I haven't worn since the war. The Torah belonged to my great-grandmother, and I don't know where the Chai came from, but I don't wear that anymore. I get too many questions. And then...
So because of sort of the tensions at the moment,
Yeah, just I don't want to be visibly Jewish type of thing. And then, yeah.
How does that sort of feel, you know? It's almost like you're hiding your cultural identity.
Yeah, I think it's hard because we hear stories like from my grandparents about my great-grandparents who, you know, are Holocaust survivors. They, you know, survived the worst that we can imagine because of their Jewish identity. And then when my grandparents came to Australia, they were told, you know, don't speak Polish, be Australian, all of these things. And they kind of pushed down their Judaism and, you know, Jewish identity. So it feels like we've kind of reverted back to a society that isn't as socially accepting as we thought. And that's just sad because, you know, we're really lacking social cohesion that we once had because of this conflict.
What support have you received from the university, if any, at all?
The university has been very mixed in the way in which they approach these conversations with Jewish students and myself in particular. A lot of the time we don't really see the tangible change that we want.
Do you think there's a situation where these demonstrations and protests and encampments can exist without anti-Semitism?
100% they can. 100% they can. I think we just need to remove certain rhetoric that Jewish students have, you know, spoken out about that is harmful. Phrases like from the river to the sea, intifada, to promote a ceasefire or to speak about, you know, the connection that Palestinian people have to the land or protesting, you know, the IDF's actions. That's all completely legitimate and warranted. And I would be there.
I just saw your tattoo.
Yes. That says Chazak ve'ematz, which means be strong and of good courage in Hebrew.
While universities claim to be concerned for the safety of Jewish students and staff, their efforts to curb anti-Semitism fall short. For Mia, she hopes universities will make some serious changes sooner rather than later. Back at the University of Newcastle, we met with Anjali Beams, another one of the student pro-Palestine organisers here. The encampment is gone now, and she tells us it wasn't security who packed things down, but the protesters who made the final decision.
But the pack down of the final tent was us sort of conceding because we agreed with the university for disclosure and also a process going forward towards divestment.
And so the deal that's sort of been met is that they will disclose some partnerships and...
Yeah, so all like financial ties, so that includes sponsorships, grants, research, investment, the like, with defence industries. So they've agreed to that.
Do you feel like the students are conceding on a lot of your points of contention and demands in these negotiations?
It's sort of hard to weigh up because I think we're pretty like grateful and feel pretty empowered that we're even getting disclosure to the extent that we want it, and we've got a process for hopefully winning the second demand, and so there is a path to like victory that we can see and we can sort of mobilise around, but they've sort of refused the disclosure of ties with Israeli academic institutions, and their reason for that is like combating anti-Semitism.
Jewish students and Jewish staff have felt unsafe as a result of these encampments. Do you think there was maybe anything that
the movement more broadly could have done differently to ensure that safety and ensure that those people weren't targeted or felt unsafe?
That was a concern that we really had before even setting up our encampment, was that how do we make sure that this is clearly a space where anti-Semitism is not tolerated? I think that the notion of like anti-Semitism's been weaponized when it comes to the encampment specifically, but that's not a reflection of like the mass sort of movement that's happening, because that movement is about like the right to life and justice and equity, and there's no space for anti-Semitism in that.
Say that, you know, the demands aren't met or the student movement isn't satisfied with the negotiation process. What is the future plans for protest?
At the moment, we're sort of in a waiting period because we've put these demands and these like requirements of what we want to the university. On the outside, it might look like we've stopped, but we're actually still engaging in the process of getting our demands met, and we're still sort of prepared to like mobilize should we no longer think that these negotiations are going anywhere.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!